Welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole
and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and we're here to interview world-leading researchers, clinicians and people with lived experience
to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
Welcome, everyone. So glad you could join us again for another episode of the Research Works podcast. Hi, Dana.
Hello. How are you?
I'm well.
You're looking fresh.
Thank you.
You're good.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you in the studio. I missed you the other day. I'd much rather do this with you. Thank
Of
you.
course,
I would like to say that.
Likewise, the feeling is mutual.
Because we're in for a treat today.
We are.
We have an in-studio guest,
Always
friend
exciting.
of the show. We love saying friend of the show.
Officially,
Welcome back.
yes.
Professor Andrew Whitehouse.
Thank you so much. Friend of the pod. Do I get a certificate?
Yes,
Oh.
we can generate one for you.
Oh,
Yes,
thank
definitely,
you.
for
Thank
sure.
you.
Yeah.
One for the CV.
We'll get producer Ed to make a note of that.
Yeah,
and we'll-
that's right. Right, just add that to his list.
Present that to you next time you come on the show.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Oh,
Friend of the
wow.
show status.
Yeah, soon I'll be family of the pod. Yeah.
True. Yeah. Next tier
We need to
up.
work out our tier.
We do, don't we? We
Yeah.
haven't thought about that yet.
Okay, we'll brainstorm.
Sixth season.
Yeah. Oh, so great to have you back in the studio, Andrew. It's always a privilege to talk to you, and today is no different. We're talking about something a little bit different. We've had you on to talk about research previously, but I think what's really exciting about our conversation today, spoiler alert, is how research can inform policy. And this conversation, I think, is a really nice insight into that. But we're not going to get into it right now. We need to give all of our listeners a bit of a formal introduction to you. I know.
It's okay.
Always uncomfortable for
And
the person.
we tried to shorten this one a little bit as well to summarise more of it so it's less awkward.
Good.
Yes, it takes a while to get through citations.
Less awkward,
Yeah.
just as impressive, I think.
Different style.
Yeah.
Get a different style for a policy.
Okay.
one.
Just as long as my mum is still happy.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All
we'll
right.
be
Okay.
so proud.
All right. Good.
I'll give it a go. You can
All right,
let
I'll
me know
let
what
you
you
know.
think.
Yeah.
See if it passes the mum test. Professor Andrew Whitehouse is the Deputy Director of Research, the Angela Wright Bennett Professor of Autism Research and Director of CliniKids at the Kids Research Institute Australia. He is one of Australia's leading voices in neurodevelopmental research and clinical innovation, with a global reputation for advancing understanding and support for children with autism and developmental disabilities. Professor Whitehouse has published extensively, having led numerous national and international collaborations, and was appointed Chair of the Expert Panel for the Review of the School Education Act 1999, WA, bringing together deep academic expertise, policy insight, and a commitment to inclusive education, which, as we said, is the topic of our conversation today.
Very nice. Look, if it makes me squirm, mum will be happy. So thank you.
That's so true.
Thank you.
That is a good test. Does it make me deeply uncomfortable? Yes.
that's right.
My mum's probably going to be happy with it. Yeah.
Spot
good.
on.
Yeah. Good.
So, Andrew, that's the uncomfortable, formal getting to know you part. We also like to do an uncomfortable, informal getting to know you part.
Great.
Less uncomfortable. I'm just
Okay.
being facetious there. But maybe it is. I don't know.
Let's see.
And this is kind of appropriate after the comment you made earlier, Dana, because I am dressed in my work gear today.
Yeah, you look good.
As we all are.
Mm-hmm.
But my icebreaker question today, if you could set the dress code for your place of work, what would it be?
Oh, fantastic. Look, I'm thinking, Australian listeners will understand this. I'm not too sure if international listeners will, but I'm thinking stubbies. So stubbies, singlet and some thongs. Now, that really needs translation for an international audience.
Please do.
So firstly, stubbies are very short, tight pants that men in the 80s sort of wore as just uniform. Yeah.
I think originated as like a football short. They would wear them to play Australian rules football, but then that kind of bled out into just everyday life.
It became a weird fashion. And look, we should bring it back. Singlet, so just a singlet, and just let it hang all out there. Doesn't matter if you've got the body or not. Now, thongs in Australia actually mean flip-flops, all right? So it's
or jandals, if you're
Kiwi, or
Really?
yeah. And
okay.
so just to be clear, we are talking about footwear rather than underwear. Okay, so that's what I'm wanting. Yeah. So I'm not too sure this will get past the HR department, but we should try. We should at least try.
Andrew, I had some insight into this question. I ran this question past someone who knows you well, and they said if they were a betting person, they would have said that you would be a flip-flops kind of guy. So
Really?
Spot on. I would wonder if this person would also take me for a stubbies kind of person, because if it's the person I think, I'd love to see them in stubbies too. So, yeah.
Now, Dana, this is an interesting question for you because you, in some ways, set the dress code at your workplace.
I do, and it is exactly how I want it to be.
Okay.
It is phenomenal. So we want to still look professional. Mm-hmm. So you have a polo, but it has got a collar, you know? So, and then my favorite color is blue. So it's blue. That's nice. I get to wear that every day.
Yeah.
And if you're going to wear pants, it's got to be really movable ones. So nothing that has a tight waistband, because you can't sit and bend over and work with kids. Man,
Elastic
those
for
days
life.
I used to have the country road ones. You bend over, you're like, ugh, you know, like if you had a big lunch. So elasticated, everything flexible, and runners, shoes, like, you know, really cool looking shoes is my ideal. And then that's pretty much it. And then every Friday we do have a fun Friday. Today is Friday, so we've got Funky Sock Friday on. So if we don't have funky socks, someone here actually, well done, Andrew. Yes, that is it.
Oh, thank you.
So a bit of fun injected into that as well. And if you don't wear a funky sock, apparently we get fines these days. So one person didn't do it a few times, and now she has to write an apology letter. So it is the workplace of my dreams, and we get to dress the way that I've always intended. It's basically that way in PJs to work, but you know, with a professional twist.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
It's good, isn't it?
There is a dream about working in a place where you feel comfortable in your skin and clothes, and you have just created that.
It is so good.
This is what 10-year-old Dana wanted. I can say.
That's right. I just got to remember when I go for big meetings to not wear this. I do put on a jacket and a shirt.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I come back to work, I change back into my clothes.
Fantastic.
That's right. I love it. What about you, Ash?
So I've obviously thought about this question a lot. I am one of those people that as soon as they get home from wherever they are, I have to put my comfy clothes on. So it's not necessarily pajamas. I would categorize it more as leisure wear, elasticized, always. And I like to put my slippers on.
Yeah.
So, yes. And in our office where we work, it is very cold.
Yeah.
So I feel like if I was able to wear all my elasticized things and my slippers, maybe a robe, that would be.
I'm feeling a podcast around this. Given the visuals, we can actually have that. I think that we should. Yeah.
So Andrew, we did a very late night recording back in season 1. Maybe.
Yep.
Yes, and Dana and I both. This is pre-YouTube. Yep. We did come in our
boots,
leisure wear.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
It was so nice.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah.
It was really good. Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that COVID, stuck with. It's more elasticized pants.
Yeah, it's really what that is. More comfy.
More comfy.
Buy shares in elastic pants. There we go.
That's right.
Here's the message.
I want to see how this relates to this. Most of your questions do relate to what we're going to talk about. I'll see how we bring it in.
Could be a long bow to draw, but we'll see how we go.
We can do it. We can do it. I'll make sure we can.
Not. Look, I think I'm seeing some threads.
Okay, that's good. All right, well, let me give everyone a rundown of what we'll be talking about, and then we've got lots and lots of questions. So in 2024, a landmark review of the School Education Act 1999 was undertaken in Western Australia. Why? Because our education laws drafted over 25 years ago haven't kept pace with modern understandings of disability, inclusion, or the rights of children and families. This review, driven by an expert panel of deep experience in education, disability, and human rights, was driven by one clear question: does our law support every child to access and thrive in school, or are there too many barriers to access and inclusion for students with disability? So what followed was an in-depth consultation with families, clinicians, educators and young people with lived experience, resulting in 15 recommendations that aim to remove barriers from enrollment gatekeeping to inconsistent support to exclusionary discipline, replacing them with legal obligations for inclusion, voice and access. So for the allied health clinician, this matters because so often we're working with children whose ability to engage in school is shaped by systems, not just skills. And today we unpack what this report means and what could change if we get this right. How's that for a teaser?
I love it.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, tell me what happened.
Yeah,
tell me. Yeah.
So, Andrew, I was staggered to hear that it had been 25 years of, no kind of review or shaping of the School Education Act. Can you explain to us what has prompted this to happen at this point
Absolutely.
in time. Yeah.
Can I take you back a bit? So for Australian and also international listeners, it's really important to understand how the laws work within a federal system. So Australia is a federalised system, which means that we have a strong national government, but we also have very strong state governments, which devolve responsibility a lot within our constitution to state governments. Now, one of those devolved responsibilities is education. And so while we do have national laws around education, legislative acts, the majority of the operation of schools and education takes place through state law. And so the state law for education, we've had one for going more than 100 years within Western Australia, but it was rewritten in 1999 and passed in and proclaimed in 1999, which means that it was written really in 97, 98, leading up to 1999.
Okay.
And that was the sort of modernisation of our education system in Western Australia. Now, the key thing there is that when we think about the context of disability, so many of the advances that we recognise today in the area of disability have happened over the last 25 years, which means that a law written in 97, 98 and then proclaimed in 1999 does not recognise any of those massive advances that have occurred. Now, there has been many different amendments to the Act, maybe 12 or so different amendments to the Western Australian School Education Act over those 25 years. None have related to the area of disability in particular. So what has brought on the review that was conducted last year? Well, necessity. So part of it's necessity and leadership. And so the necessity is the growth in students with disability over the last 20 years has been staggering. So in Australia, we have what's called a National Consistent Collection of Data, NCCD, and that actually quantifies the proportion of students within Australia that have an adjustment based on their learning needs. And so we could call that disability or it's slightly different, but we can use them synonymously now. That's risen from about 15% to nigh on 25%. So that's 1 in every 4 student requires an adjustment above and beyond the normal curriculum to learn. So there's that necessity and you just happen to open any newspaper, not that people open newspapers anymore, you just need to click on a website to see the stories about students being, students' rights not being met, schools under pressure with students with disability. The second bit was leadership. And the previous state government had a really strong desire to understand how we could start to move this issue forward. And the Minister Tony Butty, who was the Minister for Education in the previous government, really took the bit between the teeth and said, actually, we really do need to do a look at our laws and how that is enabling students with disability and what barriers it's providing. And that was the prompt for the review.
Wow. So, Andrew, how does the Act... And you said that, there's been amendments and now we're at the point where it's been reviewed in its entirety. Could you explain how the Act shapes education experiences for children in WA, like on a day-to-day basis or, in broadly?
Yeah.
So how does that work?
I was so chuffed that the Minister asked me to lead this process and that after the sort of like, oh, this is great. It's the, oh my God, what is legislation? And I mean, it was slightly less than that, but I'm not steeped in legislation. But there was an amazing team, and I went on a very steep learning curve to understand. Well, legislation is so divorced from my day-to-day, particularly in the context of service provision. What has this got to do with it? And the answer is it has everything to do with it. It is the ultimate rule book around how schools are formed, enrollment, as well as operational matters like discipline, how we can adjust our services, how we can fund services to ensure kids are met. But it also has some more nuances that we don't think affect us but do affect us day to day. What are the rules for government systems in Australia? What are rules for non-government systems? So in Australia, for international listeners, we do have a dual system where there's a very strong public provision of schools, but also a growing private provision of schools as well. are those aspects of the law matched or are they not matched? So it really provides the ultimate rule book around which systems operate, and then there's another layer below that. That's the operational guidance, which set their clock to the rules. Yeah. And everything goes back to that rule book, which is the legislation.
That's good to know, isn't it? In terms of the context and the background, that, you know, that's why you need to have these things in place. Yeah. Now, jumping into some of the recommendations, one that really I wanted to start with was around embedding inclusive education. Yeah. And there's a lot even in that term in terms of what it means. Yeah. Can you unpack that for us? Like, why do we mean inclusive?
Yeah, definitely can. And look, Australia has been an absolute leader in its advocacy around inclusive education, and some of the panel members that really drove this review are absolutely leading advocates on this. Inclusive education is a really defined term, and it's defined through the UN Convention of the Rights for People with Disability, particularly Article 24 in that. And it's really around education of students alongside their peers in the same environment. So that's very, very clear. It's actually about the location, it's about the proximity, it's about the culture, and it's really about learning side by side. Right. The key thing about inclusive education, though, because people start to gulp when they think about that, oh my goodness, does this mean, and it goes very quickly into the culture wars of mainstream education, and it's often seen as versus special schools, or what we call in Western Australia education support centres. Yeah. I think they're actually, and I try to short circuit that sort of culture war by thinking about three things that I think most people can sign on to. Number one is that the idea of phasing out ed support centres, special schools right now would be a disaster because our mainstream schools simply cannot support every child, and that's just the reality. That's the first reality. The second one is that we should. There are far more kids that could and should be educated alongside their peers than are currently happening. Yeah. And the third thing is that we need to progressively move towards a more inclusive system and keep that improvement happening all throughout our history. They're the three things that I think everyone can assign on to. Yeah. And the important thing about inclusive education as defined by the UN is it's not what's called an absolute right, it's called a progressive right. It means that it needs to continually improve over time. It doesn't mean that we need to be at the destination now, but we do need to continually show improvement along the way. So inclusive education is how do we get all kids educated in the same environment as much as possible and continuing to improve along that journey.
That's beautiful. And obviously this paper is a recommendation, what's been released. So what is the process from here then? Like, it needs to be, as a recommendation, what happens from there, I guess is my question.
It's a very long process. Yeah. And look, my process has ended for just now.
Okay.
It's always started with a review. What's there and what does the community and what does research and evidence say that should perhaps be amended. Okay. So it's the start, and then goes through a very long process. So it goes to the minister presents it to cabinet. Then if the cabinet wants to take it forward, it goes to drafting, and then everyone's involved there, and then to parliament and on. But it is a long process and can take between sort of 3 and 5 years. So we do need to temper expectations, but. To get to the review phase means that it is on the journey, and not many things get on that journey. Sure. So while it's a long process, and so it should be, these are our laws, and they're very hard to change, it is on that process.
There is an intent to move there.
Absolutely. Okay. And I think I should say one thing there is that often the hardest thing is to get ministerial and government engagement around this. And what ministers have constantly shown is that this is a priority, is that schools are buckling under the weight of who they are in 2025 and who their cohort of kids are, what are the roles, what are the responsibilities, what are the expectations. And this is part of the solution to how we come to terms with that in 2025.
Yeah, it's great.
Andrew, I'd like to talk about the lived experience perspective for a moment, because as part of this process, you and the panel obviously consulted with young people and families of young people with disability. I think we've all heard stories, about the young people with disabilities experience within education. And I just wondered if you might be able to share some of the things that you learnt from families throughout this process. Were there any stories or moments that stood out to you?
Well, there were. Look, the first thing that we should say is that WA has a lot to be proud of. Western Australia, in fact, Australia's different school systems, because our school systems are different by state, broadly similar, but have important nuances.
Yes.
We have much to be proud of. And as part of this process, we also reviewed jurisdictions all around the world, and that reinforced that we have a lot to be proud of. And we have a fair way to go too as well. I think that the challenges that kids are facing now are just so much more than I ever faced, however long ago, 80s, 90s education.
An undisclosed number of years ago.
Indeed. No, in the 80s and 90s compared to now, what kids are facing now is just extraordinary. And I think what we should also say is that what schools are facing now are extraordinary as well. Now, throughout this process, we, went up and down Western Australia. So for those who don't know WA, it's a huge state, many times bigger than Texas, and it is vast in the context of geography, but also in the experiences of different people. And so we heard from hundreds of different voices, and particularly we went and consulted with kids in particular. We also consulted a lot with educators. I think we also need to grapple with the understanding that we are expecting more of school than they were ever designed to provide.
100%. Yeah.
And that the idea in late 80s, 90s, that a teacher was to be a mental health support for their students, which is the expectation now. It's just totally foreign. And that's actually a minimum expectation now, but it would have been out of the realm of thought then. But also the expectations in terms of the broader cohort of kids. Kids are very different in the challenges they're experiencing, the challenges that they're expressing. And also the expectations that we have from parents on schools as well. That has only magnified as schools have become the hub of the community. While, again, 30, 40 years ago, schools were not the hub of the community. They were an important part, but they were not the sort of sun around which communities revolved, and they are now. And so how do we marry up these challenges that the kids are experiencing, along with the expectations, but then the reality of what we have to work with in schools and teachers as humans as well. So, there were many stories around kids not having their needs met. There are also many stories about teachers who were desperate to meet the needs of the kids, but were working in a system that is just not there to provide. It's not designed to provide it. How do we marry that up? And what role does legislation provide in setting the clock for that?
And on that, I mean, one of the really common stories that I do hear at the moment when parents are looking for the first time school, and they sometimes get the sense, a very strong sense, that this will not be the right school for them because it's not set up well for them. So the enrollment process and almost that sort of gatekeeping is quite a challenge in terms of can I go to the school? Do they have to make amendments and changes for our child? What is the actual answer there? So what is it currently written in the Act at the moment? What are the recommendations based around that?
So this is one of the sort of more marquee recommendations, I think we could put it, in the Act. Now, this is around public schooling. So public schooling is the right of every citizen to have their child educated within their local public school. Now, one of the reviews that we did is understanding how is that done within jurisdictions around Australia, so different states. It's very standard that if you live within this area, you have a right to enrol in this school. Okay, so it's a local catchment area law.
Sure. Yes.
WA has a really peculiar second bit to the law where it says that, yes, the local catchment area, you have a right to enrol, but also only if that school has, in quotes, appropriate educational program. Now, that's a bit of a historical legacy type clause that has been in there for 25 years.
Right.
Now, you can imagine how that appropriate educational program can be used by schools who may not necessarily feel they have the resources to support a student with disability. And the reality is that is often used as a bit of a pressure release valve to say that we can't do this and therefore that student is better supported by another school. Well, actually what we do know through Disability Discrimination Act and Disability Standards for Education, which are higher order legislation federally, that actually that can't happen. You can't discriminate based on the presence of disability. So I always, we often go to the idea of gatekeeping when we think about that. Okay, the law allows us to say no to kids with disability. I talk about it in the idea of pressure release valves. If there is a pressure release valve there, where is the incentive and the obligation of schools to get better? Where's the incentive and obligation of systems to support that school to get better? Where's the incentives and obligations for decision makers to hold responsibility and accountability of the system to empower? And so I see it less around gatekeeping and more around that we are on our march towards an evolving inclusive education system. We must get rid of pressure release valves to ensure that incentive is there to move.
That's important, isn't it? Because you do, with what we're expecting from schools, I mean, I do often hear of families going to a school 20, 30 minutes away and they've got kids in different schools and now their friendship groups are all in different places. And you can see how important it is to support across all levels of the chain of the education system so that you can be educated in your local school. I mean, that will be very ideal with the right supports in place. But it has to be well supported because otherwise, like you said, it's not it's set up.
I go back to those three things as well as that, we can't dramatically change the school system overnight. That would be disastrous. Kids will be missed. Secondly, we must, there are more kids that should be educated in mainstream schools immediately if they're better. And then thirdly, we must progress towards an inclusive education system. And if we are providing all of these outs that schools are not incentivised and systems are not incentivised, then we're simply not going to make that move.
That's a good point.
So, Andrew, for our clinician audience, we have lots of clinicians who listen and I'm sure, would have seen your name on this episode and will be tuning in. What role do our allied health professionals have in supporting inclusive education under the changes that are being proposed to the Act?
I'll start broadly first. I think that this goes back to what I was saying before, is that we are to a large extent in many school systems around the world, if not explicitly but implicitly implying that educators should also take on a bit of a clinical role, that they are dealing with a larger proportion of kids who require adjustments and that often crosses over into adjustments that perhaps are not their expertise. And they are dealing with 28 other kids and they are stretched and 28 other sets of parents and they are stretched beyond belief. So clinicians clearly have a major role in the support of kids within that system. We also need to deal with the reality that school systems are not yet set up to accept, embrace and partner with clinicians in the way that they could, should, and actually want to. And one thing I've observed along the path is often an antagonistic relationship between educators and clinicians, and that's understandable from both sides. The clinicians are desperate to use, employ their expertise to support the kids, and that's often what parents are saying to them: "We need you." Educators are wanting the same, but also have all of these pressures on them that are just unspeakable, and other pressures from not just the day-to-day, but also in terms of what the schools will allow. And so how do we break that down? Now, I think that clearly what we do need to do is look at a new model of schooling. The review of the Education Act in particular, there are certain aspects that would speak to this, and I'll get to that.
Yeah.
But I think we also need to look at different schooling models. So there's this idea of full-service schools that has been kicking around for a while, and actually when the previous Minister for Education signed the National School Reform Agreement with the federal government, part of that deal was the establishment of 4 full-service schools where you have clinical service provision, clinics alongside schools or at least co-located with schools. And how that would work in terms of a dipping in, dipping out model is still remains. That's the devil in that detail. But the idea that kids are removed from school to go to a clinical appointment and maybe they go but they miss a half a day of school or all day of school is clearly not what we want. We need to have them more closely working. Now, so the School Education Act review doesn't speak specifically to that, but what it does speak to is objects and principles. So at the start of every legislation, here's my 1 minute, and I hope I'm not going to bore you here. At the start of every legislation, you have objects, which are often a set of dot points that lawyers are going to hate me for simplifying it like this. But essentially just summarise, you're going to read about 300 pages in this legislation. These 6 dot points summarise what it's trying to do. Okay. That's the objects. The principles are when you're reading these 300 pages, what's the value system you should be reading it with? And that really comes to light in the context of when a minister, a director general, a principal, a teacher, these are the people named within the Act, need to make decisions. When you're making 2 choices, what value system should you bring to that choice? And so the Act recommends the introduction of principles because currently the School Education Act doesn't have principles, doesn't have a value system explicitly named as to how we should interpret the Act. So in the context of a value system, the review does recommend that perhaps the principle around inclusive education and partnerships should be part of the key principles through which this is interpreted. And partnerships, of course, mean family and all of those who can support the child in that education system.
Wow.
Like that. And that's really utopia, isn't it? Like it's having the full service school arrangement as you talked to earlier. I can picture those kids who, and we're talking about goal-directed therapy. So often goals are related to things that happen in the school, environment and participation and
so a big
friends
part of their
and
life
fun
is,
and family. It all happens at school. And so to be able to have that included as part of
I think
that system.
I totally agree. And again, that's all there. That's all there in the school reform agreement that to do this. The most exciting thing that came out of this review is I must have talked with more than 1,000 people throughout this thing, is how aligned every stakeholder is for change. Everyone agrees that education is vital. The system is just amazing. Everyone also agrees that it needs fundamental improvement, and that goes for political level, public servant level, that goes for principals, teachers, unions, associations, parents, kids and families. Everyone wants change pointed in this direction.
And it's kind of reassuring in a way, isn't it? Because as you said earlier, it will take time, but everyone is operating with very similar values and principles on this journey. So we think it will get there at some stage.
We do, and it requires leadership. All the ingredients are there. Like the public swell is there for this. It requires leadership to say we're doing this for all sorts of reasons, and one of them is it's the right thing to do.
That's great. One of the things I read with great interest in this document, it's a long document, but one of the things that I found very interesting was the use of suspensions, exclusions and restrictive practices. So what did the panel learn about how this was applied in principle, in students with disability now?
We learnt a lot, and I think it's important to say that the way things are operating now are just light years better than 10, 15, 20 years ago. Again, I'm going to be awful and provide a little bit of context. Is that
good.
What we called behavioural problems when I was in primary school, we are now calling disability. Okay, and so there has been greater movement towards disability as an explanation for various different behavioural challenges within the school.
Yep.
I'm making no value judgment about that. They could well be correct in the majority of cases. But it is all of a sudden going into a different bucket, and that goes into a different type of legislative requirements.
Right.
And so around the Disability Discrimination Act, that disability should not be used as a strong, clear, so manifestations of disability should not be used as the basis of discipline. That is, of course, still happening. And again, that on the parental side, it's your most treasured, wonderful person in the most in the world, and for that to happen is absolutely heartbreaking and awful. And I would be fighting tooth and nail. On the school side of things, there are children who are creating significant disruption in the class and creating a really significant, often harming self, others, property. How do we marry the two? Because how do we ensure that there's a framework through which decisions can be made that ensures the safety of that child, others around them, and the property, while also ensuring that their human rights are met?
Yeah.
And so is the Legislative Act currently set up for that? It has a little bit of improvement to go. I think a key part of that is actually how we deal with things when we get it wrong. And that's around complaints mechanisms and accountability. So at the moment, often our complaints and accountability mechanisms dealt with at the school. If something happens and the parent or someone's not happy, it's dealt with at the school level. If it does not dealt with there, it's often dealt with within department level.
Sure.
Now, one thing we heard quite a lot is that that feels like the department's marking their own homework with regards to that.
Yeah.
And certainly the Royal Commission made a recommendation around the development of an independence complaint mechanisms for education. And that forms a recommendation also within the School Education Act. So it's not just about how we can improve things at the time, it's how we can build into the system a mechanism of accountability and learning, which we may not have to the greatest extent just yet.
Sure.
Yeah. So looking ahead, acknowledging this is the first of many steps in this process, but it is a start. If the recommendations are adopted, Andrew, how soon, we don't know exactly, but how soon might families and schools start to see some of the changes that will happen downstream? So
it needs to go through that process, and then it needs to be drafted and hopefully, proclaimed into law. Now, if that wonderful process progresses, and I'd love that to happen, usually it's sort of put into place either immediately or over a period of 6 months. And so the people who were the Secretariat, who were just incredible in really doing the hard yards for this review, say that that's a sort of a 4, 5, 6 year process. And so from here, if all things go well, that's when we're expecting that. But once it's proclaimed, it depends on which recommendations are accepted and actioned and then drafted in a way with the intent. But for example, let's just take one. One of them is around actually defining what inclusive education looks like in the law. At the moment, what I say inclusive education is versus the UN versus you versus someone else is going to be very different. But once that's articulated, there is all of a sudden a standard in which there is a legislative standard in which we expect the system to support schools to meet. So that would be immediate from proclamation. But of course, there's a lot of steps to get there and a fidelity to the recommendations as well.
Yeah. It creates that universal language, doesn't it? That,
it really does.
Everyone's working to the same
I don't think we know I don't think yet we know what we're aiming for. You know what? I mean, it reminds me of the time when, child number one was on the way and we went out looking for a pram, and I think I had in my mind like one of those, Victorian era kind of, wheelie
little
things.
buggy things,
And then you head to Baby Bunting, which is in an Australian sort of, baby shop, and oh my God, they do not look like that. And you've got this huge row of things, and the reality is that you don't know what you're looking for unless you define it. And that's the same with inclusive education. Once we have something we defined and we're all working towards, and it's in legislation, things will happen.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Can you help us paint a picture? So say in 5, 6 years' time, let's say 5 years when it goes through, what would that look like for a parent that wants to enroll their child that has a disability in their local school? Like what could that look like?
Well, I think the first thing would be that parents arrive at their local school not even with the idea of saying, is this school fit for my child on the basis of disability. We all go to schools going, is this the right fit for my child? But is it the right fit, taking disability out of it? That's not even a consideration. It also means that there have been movements within the system that kids are as well supported in Derby, sort of remote Australia, as they might be in a suburban Perth. But I think also that we have all principals, and that's PALS, so the head teacher, all head teachers that are empowered, aligned, and engaged and enthusiastic about driving inclusive education within their schools. Now, I don't necessarily think that the utopia of no ed support centres is something that is something that we should articulate just now, because there'll be a lot of families extremely nervous about it. Ed support centres, special schools are just extraordinary in what they do to support kids. I mean, they truly are extraordinary. What I do think that we should see is that there's a greater proportion of kids within our mainstream settings and thriving within those settings, and those families are feeling as included and as valued as all of the other parents within that school.
It's a beautiful picture.
Love that. Yeah.
I love it.
So, Andrew, just to finish off, this amazing conversation today, if you could deliver one message, and put you on the spot here, one message directly to educators, clinicians and policymakers who might be listening to this conversation, what would that be?
I've spent a lot of my last sort of decade of professional life working on thorny policy issues. I've never been the politician or the decision maker, so I just get to do the sort of the fun work, finding out the answers and making the recommendations. But I can tell you that I have, through the sort of, half a dozen different processes I've been in at state and federal level, I have never seen stakeholders as aligned for positive change as I have here.
Exciting.
Truly, even the most sort of hardcore on one side or the other group or individual who came to see me walked out or walked in and then, discussed, came out saying the same thing, that we want positive change. We would love inclusive education. We want to support a system to march towards that. So what I would be saying to policymakers is that a lot of the hard work around this has already been done, and that taking this forward, nothing's without friction, but you are pushing on an open door. And that's the exciting thing.
Oh, that's exciting.
It is, isn't it?
Gosh, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about this report. It gives us a glimpse into the future, and it just shows what we can do, with the basis of all these different stakeholders involved. Research isn't in a vacuum either. This is informed by evidence, people with lived experience. It's really just, it's exciting to see what it can do and actually influence lives. So thank you for coming in today.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure.
So much.
Yeah.
It was
my
just
goodness.
so wonderful to chat.
I can't wait for the upgrading from friend to family. So let me know.
Okay,
All right.
He's going to hold us to that.
I know.
Yeah.
I think he might just. So to all of our listeners, look, we'll put a copy of this review, a link of it on our website, researchworks.net. And remember, there's a CPD form there as well. You can fill out to keep this as part of your PD requirements. But for now, thank you very much for coming in. Have a great day.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, look, I'm going to go back and put my stubbies on. Thanks.
You have full permission.
Absolutely. All right, to all of our listeners, thank you. Talk to you all again next time. Bye.
Bye.